Chairperson of Education and Chief Librarian, Professor Linda Anderson, Chairperson of Behavioral Sciences. And initially, when we were thinking last semester about having a new faculty activity based on Hostos, not Hostos, because psychology is here, and we have to say Hostos.
Exactly. It's like that. You don't pronounce the H. You learn that one. It's new, it's bad.
Hostos. We were thinking to have Orlando Hernandez because I remember when I was in faculty, the great presentation that he did for us introducing Hostos, the man, his vision, his legacy. But then we began thinking, why not join effort with the library and to bring also Professor William Casari, who has a lot of history talking about our community and the relation of our institution with this community, and of course, the president of Gerald Meyer, who has been here for almost 40 years or more, who really know what is this institution. So I think that today will be a day to understand why we are here, what is the meaning of this institution in this neighborhood. And you understand that we have been fighting all this year for this institution. It's all about love and passion. I was just telling Professor Casari, I don't know if you are aware of what's going on with the freshstudent.com, that they want to have a facility here in the neighborhood, which means more than 1,000 trucks every day in this area that is already overcrowded with traffic, asthma, and other negative consequences. And why, I was asking myself when I was reading this, why we cannot have an environmental friendly waterfront as other boroughs? Why always here at the Bronx? And thinking in your faculty, this would be an opportunity for you to think from business, from sociology, from humanity, from natural sciences, how we can connect our curriculum with this institution, also the man, and of course, this neighborhood. Before I give the floor to Professor Ernest Ialongo, the co-coordinator of this 175 Hostos celebration, I just want to say that when I was thinking the three presenters, I think that the three of them share passion and love for Hostos, this institution, and this neighborhood. And thinking of love and passion, I found a quote from Eugenio Maria de Hostos, and Hostos said, "Nearly all human beings love, but nearly none know how to love." And I think that the three of you know how to love. So, with that, I leave the floor to Ernest Ialongo, and thank you once again for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a Friday morning quite early. Thank you to Nelson for his lovely introduction. And again, I'm Ernest Ialongo. I teach history and behavioral social sciences department, and along with Professor Orlando Hernandez, I'm the co-coordinator of the Hostos 175 celebrations. Welcome to the junior faculty and everyone else who braved this, hopefully stays warm, day. I want to thank the Center for Teaching and Learning and the Library Department for sponsoring this event. I want to thank William Casari for being the brainchild of this event and doing all the heavy lifting and bringing this together. One less event that I have to organize is the better. And as I mentioned at our reception at Hostos 175 a week ago, none of this actually works unless everyone works together and everyone does what they promise to do. And Professor Casari has been, like my co-coordinator, an absolute gem to work with, so thank you.
Thank you.
So today, the whole point of Hostos 175 has been to get more familiar with the man, his ideas, and also the place of this college in the South Bronx. As a junior faculty, and many of my junior faculty colleagues are in here this evening, you get this job and then you work hard to keep it with reappointment and tenure and promotion and so on and so forth. You put your head down and you work hard. And somewhere along the line, we tend to forget that maybe this place was here for a purpose. It's named after somebody for a purpose. And all that comes with a history. And over collective memory here, and we're making our own memories now. But we need to know where this all began, and we need to know where that name, what that name means, and what ideas are put into practice here at this college every day. It's in our mission. We do it in our classes. The counseling department is integral in making sure we stay with our mission, along with all the other offices here. And I've had the pleasure of working with many of them in the Hostos 175 preparations. So, our goal here was to get you all familiar with the man and his ideas. And consequently, we have a number of things going on: student essay contest, curricular integration. At the bottom of your program, you'll see a website, a URL for the Hostos student. I'm sorry, Liz, I'm going to work on the pronunciation, okay? For the Hostos 175 student essay contest. And on that webpage, there is a link to a Dropbox that has a number of resources for both faculty and students to read Hostos's works, as well as articles on the man. Also, like an article by April Mays that she wrote and she spoke about last week. The lecture last week by April Mays was part of this Getting to Know Hostos, the Man and His Ideas project that we have. And some other events we have are the English department's dramatic reading that's organized this semester. Many of the students will be reading work written by Hostos. On April 28th, that's on April 10th at 12:30 in the Savoy. On April 28th at 3:30, we have the Teaching Hostos at Hostos workshop, to which I will be reaching out to you to attend, so that we can more formalize the actual teaching of Hostos and his ideas in the classrooms. And then we have this today, Hostos, the Man, the College, the Bronx, where we want to discuss the man himself. Professor Hernandez will be discussing Hostos the man, his biography. Who was he? Educator, revolutionary, anti-imperialist. And Professor Hernandez will be speaking mostly about his ideas. And the ideas were critical to Hostos's legacy, which we saw, especially with April Mays' lecture, where she showed that he believed that education was the route to active citizenry, specifically for women in his case, and here for a community that was before Hostos simply underserved with public education. William Casari will be discussing how the college fits into the Bronx, tying the history of the college to the history of the borough. A college to serve an ignored community in a borough that was all but ignored in the 1970s, and I'm sure he'll talk about the tragedy of the Bronx in the 70s and its slow rejuvenation. And Professor Gerald Meyer will be speaking about the history of the college itself. A college that nearly closed in the face of tight budgets in the mid-70s, while the Bronx was burning, and a lack of will to save it, until people like Jerry and others mobilized to keep the college open. And very briefly, William Casari is assistant professor at Hostos in the library department, as well as the college's chief archivist, and an expert on the South Bronx. He gives walking tours of the South Bronx and Mahale. Professor Hernandez is professor of humanities, a longtime faculty member here at Hostos. He translates Hostos's work. He is working on 2 books. One, a translation of Hostos's work, but also into English, but also a book on Hostos's time in New York City. And I am very excited for when this book comes out to use it in my classes. And finally, Professor Meyer, who is a founding member of Hostos. He's now an emeritus professor at the college. He's still adjuncts in our department, continues to teach history, honors, and others, writing intensive, etc. He is the author of Vito Marcantonio, Radical Politician, 1902 to 54, which is now in its 4th printing and really is the standard work on the man, Vito Marcantonio. And with Philip Canestraro, a co-editor of the landmark, The Lost World in Italian-American Radicalism, which is the book which has given the tools to finally educate really everyone on Italian-American radicalism in this country, of course. So please welcome me in in giving our presenters a warm round of applause. And first up, I'd like to call up Professor Orlando Hernandez, who will be speaking on Hostos' accomplishments as an activist and author. Each presenter has 20 minutes. Will it?
Yes.
Each presenter has 20 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. Questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernest, and thank you to Professor Rodriguez, and to Bill for hosting and organizing this event. Can you hear me, or should I use the microphone? I'm going to be using a PowerPoint so that you can see some of the things that. Okay, perfect. I'm going to have some devices to move it along, right? Yeah, but this was good. Thank you. We don't have much time today, but I thought I'd leave you with some materials. Good morning, everyone. First time, I'm very pleased, and thank you for being here. It's Friday morning, as Ernest was saying, and we do have all kinds of things to do. But you know, this is not about institutional chauvinism. It's about one of the most prominent and important figures in 19th century Latin America, who also was in New York in the almost in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1890s. Spent several years here, and one of the most significant educators. And while there's a lot to cover on Hostos, his complete works, the total 20 volumes plus one that was added on later on, plus all kinds of uncollected pieces, some of which we've been able to retrieve. So we can't focus on everything that he did. But there are important things that we need to bring out during the celebration. And I think the inspiration for us was the fact that we need to really disseminate his work, particularly among students and faculty, and let it have the ripple effect. If you don't do it at Hostos, where is it going to be done? I hope you will agree with me that this is an extraordinary body of work that deserves the attention that we're giving it. He was indeed one of the most inclusive, perhaps the most inclusive Latin American thinker of the 19th century. Because he was in fact, in support of women's education, women's scientific education, against racism of all kinds, and in support of human rights. He used the word human rights back then. He actually fought for the rights of Chinese in Peru, and he was doing things all throughout Latin America, as well as from New York, for the independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico, and against the proposals for annexation of the Antilles by the administration, as well as the McKinley administration, right over the Spanish American War. So I'd like to just devote the next 18 minutes or so to go over his legacy in one field that's significant, which is education, and another one which is often ignored or simply sidestepped, which is politics. Also considered himself a revolutionary, and he was indeed involved in projects for change, educational and political. So I think we owe it to historical truth to present him as he himself wanted to present his work, and to evaluate it and to read it critically, as he also wanted, his students and colleagues to read. So I'm going to be doing it. I've got handed out a list of books. It's not exhaustive. Those are some books that I think you may find helpful, and I'm particularly pointing out the online resources because you will be able to use those without really going too far. You can just bring that to the classroom simply by clicking on one of these devices, and also you can assign these to students. So one of them, which is the Cervantes Institute, actually has recently put in online his complete works and a good number of other texts in Spanish. And on our website, this library section of our website, or library website, we have an extensive collection of articles by and about Hostos, which I would welcome you exploring in Spanish and in English. and which we can use in our classes. Besides that, as Ernest mentioned, there's a tremendous amount, about 20-something articles that we've been able to retrieve and put together and put in a Dropbox for you to have access and to use in different fields. So those are resources which we hope you'll have a chance to use, as well as your student. I'd like to just go quickly into some of the contributions of Hostos in the various fields, and if we can just move ahead. This is something I did a few years ago, but I have just tailored it for today's presentation, and I brought some new information. This is Hostos when he was in his late 30s. I like that picture. There are not too many pictures of Hostos because he was very poor. He did not have much of an opportunity to get pictures taken of him, and he actually, at the time, they were very expensive, and he was not necessarily involved with the leadership of the political movements with regards to Cuba's independence struggle. He was involved with Puerto Rican leadership, but he did not get many pictures taken of him, even though this was the time when pictures started to become very much a part of the historical and press dissemination. So let's just go on. So we see what. So he was an important 19th century Caribbean revolutionary, and an educator born in Meyer West in 1839. This is on the western part of Puerto Rico, a small village which is still there. There's a wonderful museum which was started 10 years ago. So if you do happen to go to Puerto Rico, try to go to the western part and check out the Hostos Museum, which is in the village of Rio Cañas, closer to a different town, but nevertheless, it's about a 25-minute ride from the city of Meyer West. He was an intellectual, a writer, a humanist, and he wrote about the most diverse subjects, including law, ethics, politics, education, social development, race relations, literature, geography, and Latin American identity. He was a promoter of rights of women and an advocate for the scientific education of women, about which he gave 2 important lectures in Santiago de Chile in 1873, when the issue was being discussed. In other words, when there were actually proposals to accept women in the University of Chile. So he was there and he became part of that debate. The other part is that he was very involved with, he was an activist for natural rights, or we call human rights now, and an abolitionist. He fought for the independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico. This is a geographical review. I'm going to see Latin America, and then of course the area where he was from, Puerto Rico, right? But he is very much the result of migrations throughout the Caribbean. His grandmother was Dominican, his grandfather was Cuban. They had fled from Cuba and Santo Domingo, and it all had to do with the Haitians deciding that they had enough with slavery, so they revolted. And so these people met in Meyer West, and that's where Hostos was born. But there was clearly a background of Antilleanism in his family and in his probably his early education. And he's going to be actually one of the most important advocates for an Antillean Confederation, which would involve the independent states of Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Haiti, and sometimes Jamaica was also mentioned. And then this is the Caribbean. As you can see, there's the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which make the island of Hispaniola, where he spent time, almost a decade, in 1888 to 1889, and he actually was the director and founder of this teacher school for both male and females, men and women in the Dominican Republic at a time when this was not exactly welcome by the establishment. So it was a project by the liberals. The Liberal Party had come to power in 1880, and he was very much in touch with the liberals, like Luperon, who was one of the major figures that played a military role, although he's not a military man, in restoring the independence of the Dominican Republic against Spanish. Right? When Spain became again the colonial power in 1861, after the independence had already been gotten. This is something that's going to be happening throughout the middle of the 19th century. Some of the interests at stake, the empires, were actually looking for some of the territories of the islands for naval bases, and the canal was about to be constructed in 1869. Actually, Ferdinand Lesseps finished constructing the Suez Canal, and the French started to build a canal through Nicaragua in 1870. So there was a tremendous amount of competition about these islands on the part of several powers, including the United States. That's what we're going to say. So this is Puerto Rico, and this is the area where it's from. Okay, right here, Meyer West, but closer to Marias, right? Which is a smaller town. And he did spend his early childhood there, but by the time he was 9, he was sent to San Juan for more advanced schooling, and he was then sent to Spain, to Bilbao, for his culinary high school, from which he went to the University of Madrid to study law. He did not graduate, he did not get a degree in law. He got involved in politics and fought against the monarchy and for the Republican Revolution that actually took place in Madrid in 1868, in Spain, I should say. But Hostos did not finish his degree, and nevertheless, his command and interest in law became such that both in the Dominican Republic 25 years later and in Chile, he would be one of the important professors of law at the universities. Also, major accomplishments, he has been a major influence in intellectual and political circles in the Caribbean and Latin America in the last 150 years. He contributed to forge Latin American identity as a mestizo continent. I want to dwell on this because, in fact, when he was in Peru, the Peruvians have also a stratified system, which was very much related to not just to class, but also to race. And the Indians were actually at the lower end of the totem pole, but the mestizos played a role actually towards the middle. The white European people of European stock were actually the well-to-do criollos who controlled the country and who actually came on top after the independence of most Latin American countries. That was also the case here, by the way. They were men, they were aristocratic landed gentry, and Hostos is going to be actually arguing for the importance of the cholo. There's an interesting article that's called The Cholo, where he talks about them, they were the mixed breed between Indian and European. And he will say, well, these people should be given the rights and the opportunities to develop because this is the future of the country. Let's just say not too many people were paying attention to what he was saying, but the truth of the matter is that they have become the future of the country. If you look at Peru these days, the cholos, the mixed blood, as well as everybody else, is really very much playing the major political and economic roles. Although there's still some argument about it all, they have become a major force, perhaps the most important force in the country. And that wasn't just, a Peruvian configuration. That's happening throughout Latin America. So in Peru, he also discussed, the need to give the Chinese who worked, in the cities the opportunity to develop. He actually argued for offering the Chinese something like a homestead program that would allow them to become farmers rather than be indentured servants, which is really what they were brought us from China to do that kind of work both in this country and in Latin America. So he actually, when the whole thing gets discussed, he's going to write in the press and talk about the need to give not just dignity, but opportunities, economic opportunities to the Chinese in Peru. Yes, let's move. Yeah, Origines is something which I would like to just mention in passing. He actually was here when some of the discussions were taking place between the Sioux and the Grant administration, and he actually wrote very briefly about it. But in Latin America, when he was in Chile, he wrote a wonderful piece about the Patagonian Indians. And he writes also in one of his books about race relations between the Western world and what we then call the primitive peoples. And they just have, I would call them Native Americans or Native people. But the word was used at the time, people referred to them as savages and treated them in those terms, whereas they actually were the first settlers of this country and of the Americas. And they actually were very, there was a very sad story that he saw, in fact, the time when the last Indian wars were being fought in this country, in Argentina and other parts of Latin America. It means that the displacement and marginalization and oppression of Native Americans was then becoming institutionalized. He actually advocated for technology and progress as a means for economic and social advancement. He was a scientific thinker, and he went along with ideas that would develop Latin American countries institutionally. So he really was what they would call now a nation builder. And he proposed a continuing confederation for various reasons, including the fact that the United States was actually pushing its way down to the Caribbean, and he thought, along with Martí and other political leaders at the time, that the only way to stop the American push was to have a confederation of independent states. But he also thought that there was a possibility that racial integration would take place in the Caribbean, and that was going to be, in a way, a very important step towards getting rid of racial conflict. Let's move quickly, so I can get to the education. His accomplishments also include, his rethinking of democracy, in particular when it comes to political parties and his support for base organizations. So he works outside of the political parties, and he actually founded the League of Puerto Rican Patriots here in New York and Puerto Rico, outside the frame of political parties. And he did something very important in the Dominican Republic. He supported the League of Citizens. So there was a tremendous amount of effort in these last few years put into civic education. Now, the last few minutes I'd like to go to education. So let's run ahead. These are some books recently published on Hostos, and let's just keep going. Let's keep going, keep going. Yeah, keep going. All the way. Yes, go ahead. Now, let's devote a few minutes to discuss Hostos' contributions to education. So he conceived of education as a liberating factor, individually and socially, founded institutions, organized curricula. He wrote his text by the time he was actually the director of the Manantegui Institute in Santiago de Chile. He was writing his texts for geography, for history of civilization, for economics, political economy, as well as for Spanish. So he actually had become a man of encyclopedic knowledge. He believed in equal education for all, campaigned for the scientific education of women, and established teachers' schools for women in the Dominican Republic. He founded night schools for workers and promoted the development of kindergartens. So Hostos had the opportunity, like Martí and some of the other leaders of the time, to travel throughout the United States and also New York, and they're going to bring in ideas like kindergarten to our countries in Latin America. He developed a pedagogy and a model of progressive thinking that addressed the need to model in Latin America and implemented these in the Dominican Republic and Chile. Can you hear me? So I'd like to just quickly go over some of his main concepts in education so that you can understand why he's indeed so current to some of our discussions. Let's keep on this quickly so that you have a chance to. So what do you think in terms of educational philosophy? He believed that learners learn well when they are motivated. and that they learn better through active learning, observation, rationalism, deduction, analysis, and experimental method. So when he founded a school in Meyer West, he would take the kids out to the outdoors to study the biology right on site where nature was actually giving us the lessons of how things grow, right? So observation and experimentation. He rejected memorization as the main method of learning and the dogmatic pedagogy of scholasticism, which was still very much prevalent in the 19th century. He rejected mechanization, routine, and indoctrination damaging to the learning process and to reasoning. Along with Rousseau, he believed that the purpose of education is to make the learner a free human being. That sounds good. So let me give you a couple of quotes. He says, let the learner undertake as much initiative as possible. Allow the child's rationality to be free so that he can search for the truth by itself. He also observed that school and home are the two formidable prisons of human beings. So he wanted to change around the conditions under which these institutions kept people imprisoned. He meant it in terms of intellectual development, yes. In the end, though, he insisted that the touchstone of all teaching is the interest that it provokes, right? So motivation is really a big part of his thinking in terms of pedagogy. He also proposed a series of civic and ethical values as fundamental to the education of the complete human being, which is really his main goal. He believed that values were very much a part of learning, and the rights of citizens carried with them the responsibility to educate himself or herself. Hostos, education should be oriented towards forming democratic and interpersonal values that would lead to active participation and support, respect, and understanding. So he posited that knowledge was an instrument and not the object of education. Okay. These are pictures which you can see later on in any of his websites. I think I will stop it there. The main reason why I was so schematic is because we don't have the time to discuss all these in detail, but as more and more materials have been published to explore his undertakings and his contributions, I think we can actually understand that Hostos was very much in touch with educational theories that are really contemporary. They may be modern, if you like. Maybe he didn't have access to the experimental knowledge and experimentation that has taken place in the last 50 or 60 years, but some of these principles do apply. And while I think that we're not saying that he's going to become our leader in terms of everything that has to do with education, these are things that we need to keep in mind simply because they are actually very, very current. Moreover, his ability to include everyone in the formulation of nation, of education, of social participation, I think makes him one, if not the most important figure in 19th century Latin America that talks to us about such issues. And he says, though, and I'll finish with this, that even though he was a moralist, he believed that morality had to be based on science. Now, that's an interesting thought. Thank you very much for your attention. I have to leave because I have to be involved with a conference and I may be able to return a few minutes later. But unfortunately, I have to be out, and I don't know if I'll be here for the question and answer period, but I hope we will continue the conversation during the next few weeks.
Thank you, Orlando. Okay, so now I want to turn the floor over to Professor William Casari. And also, I forgot to mention earlier, we are recording this event. It is being live streamed right now, and it is being recorded just like the April May's lecture. We're recording everything for future usage. That being said, it's best the remaining presenters stay around the podium area so you're captured live streaming as well as recorded. Okay? Okay. So Professor Casari, take it away.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming out and happy Friday.
Yes.
Just to get us rolling, a little Bronx trivia, a little Hostos trivia. See if you were paying attention. Where was Eugenio Maria de Hostos born? Wow. This is an advanced group. Where is he buried? Anybody? Thanks, Lizette, for not. I know Lizette knows. He is buried. This is a good trivia question. He's buried in the Dominican Republic on Calle Las Damas, which is also the first paved street in the New World. If you've been to Santo Domingo, it's in the colonial zone. He said he wouldn't go back to Puerto Rico until it had its independence. Wait, there's more. Hostos' first building was a renovated factory. What did the factory make? Tires. That was an easy one. Just a couple more to keep you guys going. I know it's hard listening for too long. After a 7-year struggle by students, faculty, and the community to secure more space for the campus, which building opened in 1981? 1981. The B building. That's the former headquarters of Security Mutual Insurance. We'll talk about that in just a second. And now, before I lose you, just a little Bronx trivia. Largest park in New York City? No. Anybody else? Pelham Bay. Florida Sky. Pelham Bay Park. What manufacturing business was prominent in Mott Haven in the 19th century? Mott Haven being this neighborhood just behind us. Piano manufacturing. All right, one more. This is a good one. It's one of my favorites. What stood on the site of Co-op City before it was built? You're almost there. Freedom Land. For those of you in the audience who love history, or see several people from behavioral and social sciences, it was a history-themed amusement park. And it failed. It was open for 3 years and it closed. And that's where what I believe is still the world's largest cooperative development, housing development in the world, is still there.
There was an altitude by Bronx Mayor Richard Price, I believe,
Okay, great, thank you. I've got a lot more, but I need to move on with my presentation. If we have time, we can do some more. So first, a little bit about the Bronx. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to be able to present everything. One of the most densely populated areas in the world, but that wasn't always true. The Bronx was still fairly pastoral, farms in the 18th and 19th century. A lot of you may have heard of Morrisania. People had manors here, the Van Cortlands. There were a lot of large farms. West Farms is another one. So the Bronx remained fairly agricultural until the subways opened and New York City expanded. And that changed a lot, especially around the turn of the century, turn of the last century. It's okay.
Oh, okay. I thought it might be interesting. I think that the name the Bronx comes from somebody's farm.
It does.
Yeah, the Bronx.
I wasn't let's do it. Okay, what's the name of that person? Jonas Bronx. Jonas Bronx. Also the Bronx River. Technically the borough's named after the Bronx River. I never really got this though, but the Bronx River is named after Jonas Bronx. That one's a little confusing. So we have a lot of new developments. The subway's opened. The first subway was the IRT line. That's today's 4 line, Jerome Avenue line, 1917, 1918. A lot of development. Things really took off. The Concourse D line, which is today's D train, opened in 1933. Several of the lettered lines opened that year. The L train is actually the newest subway. Early 30s. So when that happened, just any lot was built on. Anything that was left vacant that wasn't already mapped for a park just blew up. Huge real estate, huge private investment, just took off. So that's where we get such a huge density of apartment buildings. And just a quick quote, the population began changing after World War II. When I first started working at Hostos, I just heard about the decline in the 1960s and some of the, I guess maybe some of the stereotypes you hear about. Turns out after World War II, the population was changing. Soon after World War II, some argue even as early as the 1940s, the population of the Bronx was changing. The migration of Puerto Ricans from the Island Commonwealth and African Americans from the South. Could you, I don't know if I can reach over there. So keep in mind, I just wanted you all to keep in mind some of these population shifts that were happening around mid-century, okay? And there was a huge vote for the future of the Bronx. This is what I call it. One of the biggest votes, and votes are often financial, that's what I mean. Executive Towers, which is a 440-unit white brick apartment building. It's at 165th Street in the concourse across from the Bronx Museum. It opened in 1963. Young Israel of the concourse opened in 1962. These are brand new buildings built with private money. Today's B building, the Security Mutual building, opened in 1965. It's designed by a famous architect, Horace Ginsburg, who's the architect of a lot of Art Deco buildings in this neighborhood. Okay? But then the distinction I'm making, and again, limited time, at the beginning of the 1960s, these amazing things are happening. Now keep in mind, they were planned years before for a building to open in 1963. It turns out it was one of the worst times for the Bronx. Soon after Young Israel concourse closed, Security Mutual abandoned its headquarters building and just said, see you later. And I put welcomes in quotes because the Concourse Plaza Hotel suddenly was housing what were then called welfare clients, people burned out of their homes, people placed there by the city, so that ceased to be a hotel around 66, 67. So, just keep that distinction in mind. At the beginning of the 1960s, it seemed like things were okay, but it turns out in retrospect they weren't, and things were changing much earlier. Okay, but you do have this major investment. So the 1960s leading up to the founding of Hostos is just a decade of changes. A lot of talk of slums, racial and ethnic changes. These new groups struggled to find representation in political and business communities and didn't find that, weren't finding access to higher education. Infrastructure began to decline, especially in this neighborhood and especially in some of the more notorious neighborhoods of the South Bronx. I chose not to include any pictures of fires. It's fascinating and people gravitate toward it, but I didn't include any pictures of buildings burning or anything. Can you let me know when I have 5 minutes? worst of the fires, because the fires are fascinating. Some people call it the burnt period. Those weren't rampant until, they were around, but they weren't really out of control until 73 to 77. The famous one is Howard Cosell saying the Bronx is burning, that famous quote. So the fires were sporadic, in other words, until almost 73, 74, 75, when they completely got out of control. So we're still before that in this time period. Okay. All right, so what I call the urban swirl, a lot of changes, people leaving the Bronx. Anyone who could afford to leave, almost anyone did, especially in this neighborhood and the lower part of the concourse. A lot of historians make a distinction from Fordham Road above. Fordham University was there, the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Garden. That area was a little more stable, but our area was rapidly changing. Anything below, I would say, some say Fordham Road, but certainly from this area up to near to Fordham Road. As I mentioned, Security Mutual abandoned today's B building and left. In 1972, there was a pivotal series. I'd almost say, if you go back to read these stories, you'll think I'm making it up. Martin Tolchin is one of them, and the headline is South Bronx, a jungle stalked by fear, seized by rage. The Bronx is compared to a third world jungle with open fire hydrants, packs of dogs, burning buildings, trash not being picked up. And the first time I read it, I was like, I can't believe this was printed in the paper. It's almost hysterical. I'm sure elements of it were true. So look for those if you're interested. And that's when we had some of the more infamous times in the Bronx. Fort Apache, which is the police precinct that helped inspire, again, I don't think it's too much to say the notorious movie Fort Apache, the Bronx, which there were demonstrations against. Lourdes Torres is here, and I had a colleague who did a presentation on that. So that's the time period that we're in. A rapidly changing landscape, a lot of people moving out. The new folks who are left behind, in a sense, I don't know quite how else to say it. They're only their option. Well, let me say it. I think Constance Rosenblum said it best in her book, Boulevard of Dreams. When Black and Puerto Rican people finally got the nice apartments, nobody wanted to live in the neighborhood. There's a quote similar to that in her book. When some of the best buildings on the concourse opened up, nobody wanted to be there. So it's sad. There's no other way to say that. Could you go to the next slide? Okay. So against that bleak backdrop, along comes Hostos Community College, founded in 1968. That's on time. You're good. Okay. Founded in 1968 as Community College number 8. Community leaders made it happen. Group of people, mostly Puerto Rican, got together, Puerto Rican, African American, and demanded that the community have better access to higher education, which it didn't. And that led to the founding of Community College number 8. You can go to the next one. Candido de Leon, not the first president of the college, its second president wrote a document called Administrative Document Proposal for the Establishment of Community College number 8, where he outlined everything, kind of the founding document for the college. And he later got to implement that because the first president resigned. Nasser Michelin was the first president of the college, and he, I don't want to say he kind of lost it, but a bit of a meltdown. Professor Meyer kind of had a meltdown and said, I'm out of here. And Candido de Leon came in and was president for almost 8 years. Next slide. Okay. Wow, this goes fast. So the renovated tire factory, that's today's A building, which was added onto. The front started out as the Arcs Industries building. opened in the fall of 1970. This is again 500 grand concourse. So just to go back to that, imagine a major corporation building their headquarters here and then just abandoning it. And I still haven't gotten to the bottom of that. They moved to Connecticut. Obviously they didn't want to stay in the Bronx. Why would you leave your new building? People often, I don't want to say they don't tell the truth, but when you find out people moved when they turned 5 and you ask if it was because it was time for them to go to school, I've had several people who said, oh no, my parents just wanted to move. And I don't know, did they want to move? Or the whole reason they were moving was to get out of here. So I still haven't gotten to the bottom of the whole story of Security Mutual. The Castle on the Concourse, which has been here since I believe 1896. Probably won't be here much longer. Next slide. Okay, so milestones, just really quick. I know I don't have too much time left. January 1968, college established. September 1970 opens doors to class of 623. Those are just some quick milestones. The date wrong on there? It was April 22nd, 1968. The college was founded, so I may have the wrong date on that slide. Go ahead. People love pictures, so I want to make sure you guys see these pictures. And very soon, we are going to have more of these online. This is then State Senator Jose Serrano advocating for Hostos. You can barely see him, but he's there. This part of the building, it was set back from the street, so that's why it may look very different. It was set back from the street. Next, please. So this is now Congressman Serrano, who was our representative saving Hostos, and he jokes that a lot of people want to take credit for saving Hostos, but he truly can take some credit for that, as well as our colleague Jerry Meyer. Okay, next please. And here's Professor Meyer, who meticulously saved memorandums, photographs, all kinds of things, which is why we have so many of those photographs in Hostos archives today. Next, please. Okay, now Professor Meyer, I didn't want to get into his territory, but I did want to set the stage. We now have a vacant building. We have classes taking place in a renovated tire factory. Okay, not exactly the nicest building, very cramped conditions. Okay, so what happens after that? Go ahead. Okay, and this Professor Meyer is going to get more into, but I did want to show you these pictures. The post office, our New Deal post office, and a demonstration. Go ahead. Community involvement. The community really came together to found Hostos and save it and keep it from closing. I'm going to move quickly now. All kinds of marches. One more. Okay. Space was always an issue. You may think we need space today, and we do. They really needed space. They had 67, the number was 67 square feet per student or something. It was the lowest in CUNY. Hostos was the smallest space, the lowest facilities, no library, no daycare center. The no's just went on and on. Go ahead. I didn't really get to talk about this as much as I wanted, but let me finish on, I guess what I would call structural issues. If you guys can think about what maybe were some issues when the college opened, the community was responding to the need for more allied health professionals and administrative secretarial people. It was a huge push for the college to create college graduates who would then be able to join the workforce, right? So some things are still the same today. We have mostly women, 73% of our student body, that was true then. Still, not all adults, but more adults, although our student population has gotten younger. territory. But think of some of those structural issues, what's true still today for us in terms of the community we're serving. And we still have poor healthcare outcomes, which we did then, but we still have great community partnerships. So some of the issues are still the same, but the great news is the college is very much stronger, and we're still here, which is the title, which was the first title. Let me finish with that. And I apologize, I'm hopefully getting over a cold, but when Jill Jones first wrote this book, it was called We're Still Here. It's called South Bronx Rising. And the title came from the fact that the people who stayed, who didn't leave in the South Bronx. So this is a good book, and I have a bibliography prepared, but I wasn't able to get it finished, but I'm happy to distribute it to people with a lot of my sources for the information in this, and I think I'll finish there so we don't go over time.
Thank you. Once Professor Casari's bibliography is done, we can put it up on the Dropbox.
Sure.
So now I'd like us to welcome Professor Emeritus Gerald Meyer, who will be speaking on the history of Hostos Community College.
Good morning, everybody. Hi. How's everybody? Good to see everybody here. My students, oh my God, you're going to get extra grade. Guaranteed. You know, I mean, showing up for your professor, I mean, that's a no-winner. You know, no brainer. And so I'm really happy to be here. Henry de Hostos was a very great man. He was a Renaissance man who made tremendous contributions in an astounding range of areas, in sociology, in literature, in geography, in political theory. The list is almost endless. He's truly a great Renaissance man and a very great man. But the area that I think he's most remembered for, and in any case perhaps most immediately relevant to us right here, was that he was a great teacher. He developed a pedagogy, a theory of teaching, which is of enormous importance at the time that I am absolutely convinced is as relevant today to all of us. And his educational theory, his pedagogy, was one that had certain principles. And I think the principles, as I see it, was that there's really only one education for everyone. That everyone really needs and deserves the same education. This is a radically democratic notion. That there isn't a type of education for the children of the elite and another education for the children of the working people or the poor. That all human beings need a broad education, need what we would call today a liberal education, to know about the social sciences, to know the humanities, to be able to express themselves, and that this was a universal right, not just the right to education, but the right to a liberal education, an education that would cultivate people's minds, and I think in that way, what he saw and expressed explicitly was that was the only way that education could create citizens, could create individuals who would be able and willing to enter the society as actors in the society, as those who would really be able to move the society in a democratic direction. And this connection of education to society is very, very critical, I think, in his thinking, because that the pedagogy of Hostos is profoundly political. It has to do with questions of power. It has questions of understanding that education that merely reflects the society simply reproduces the society. If you have a society, if you have education that just simply reflects the society, the effect of that is to simply reproduce the society perpetually, and therefore it's profoundly conservative. And what Hostos was interested in was really an extraordinarily revolutionary project, which was to bring independence to Puerto Rico and independence to Cuba, and to bring to republicanism everywhere, and to struggle against the obscurantism, the darkness that descended upon Spain and was never shaken off, and therefore then enters into Latin America and elsewhere, and to target the specific obstacles to enlightenment, which was slavery, first and foremost. That he was a great abolitionist, and which is really the litmus test for anyone in that period, but also to see that science is critical, that the people develop a scientific mentality so that they wouldn't fall into superstition as the fallback, that as a substitution for superstition, there could be a scientific thinking in terms of the social sciences, and with the humanism, a care of human beings coming out of the humanities, is an extraordinary vision. And really what I think for us, there's so much to this man, but for us immediately, and at least in an immediate sense, that our concern is to see that he is a teacher of teachers, that he really presented a means and method for teachers, and those, and we're all teachers in some way. We are all teachers. It's very, very critical. And particularly if you're from a working class background, you go to college, you're a teacher within your family. But you've got to be careful with that so they don't get angry at you, resentful. But we're teachers in our communities, we're teachers in the student club, librarians are teachers, counselors are teachers. We're teachers with our friends, and by example, and by providing insight. But those of us who are professional teachers or who intend to take that on as a profession, we need a theory. We can't just be bundling about from one point to another. There have to be some underlying principles. And I think that Eugenio Maria de Hostos, that he has a theory which is very, very extraordinarily grounded in a set of very valid principles. I suspect that really where his thinking begins is probably with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the great philosophe from before the French Revolution, the great radical philosophe, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And I think the thinking starts probably from there. It's very interesting to me, to us, I think, is that de Hostos's thinking then leaps ahead into the 20th century with people like John Dewey, someone that I've been working on a great deal on, Montecavallo, where of connecting education to society. But I think the connection with Hostos is what we call a dialectical connection. It's not just education serving the society, to fit us into this society, to get us to adapt to this society. Do we want to be this society, or do we want to be the people to create a better society? If we're just going to adapt to this society, we won't get much further than our parents were able to get, or what would be our motivation? Why did we come to America? Why are we in college? But for some advancement for ourselves in the process for the society as a whole. That there's a social project involved in the education to create a democratic society. And you cannot create a democratic society if the citizens are not able to think, that the citizens don't know history, if they don't know law, if they don't have the confidence to act, there will be no democratic society. And I think this is very deeply connected at every point that with Hostos are the projects of the abolition of slavery. of education for women. The most telling, memorable phrase, you know, that reason has no gender. You know, it's just extraordinary. It just wraps it all up. And it's someone that's really one of our heroes. We have to recognize and know and defend our heroes. People that spend their lives in the service of democracy, in the service of those that are not powerful, that have great needs, and use their intelligence and their time, their effort, their will on behalf of the great masses of people that we're all a part of, the great humanists. So, wow, what a legacy that Hostos has given this college. But it's really a little fearsome. It's, you know, this type of legacy is a great responsibility, but it's a little bit scary. It's a little bit frightening. Because by taking the name of Eugenio Maria de Hostos, that's a big responsibility for this institution. When this institution is a product of a great democratic movement, that if he were alive, de Hostos would certainly have been a major figure in. And that movement was the movement for open admissions, for the right of students in New York City to go to college if they had a high school diploma or the equivalent of a high school diploma. That only existed in New York City starting in 1968 for the first time. Prior to that, admission to the city colleges, there was no real city university yet, was by grades. And in New York City, only 10% of the students in the city colleges were non-white. Only 90% of the students of the city colleges in 1968 in the city of New York were white. And where this was most distressing and most noticeable was in City College, because City College was in Harlem. So, and it was the most white school. So here you have, you know, this, you know, historical black community. This is before gentrification. No Starbucks. You know, there was no Starbucks in Harlem. So you have Harlem, and coming out of the subways were these armies of white students from wherever, you know, Westchester. I don't know. They were coming from somewhere into Harlem to go to college, to be on top of the hill, and there was a sprinkling, a mere sprinkling of black students and hardly any Latino students whatsoever. Now, that flies in the face of any notion of education for democracy. How could that be a democratic project when those most in need of education, most determined to do something about education, were not allowed admission to colleges in this city of New York? Well, there was a mass movement of students in 1968 which compelled the city to have open admissions. And overnight, two things happened. One was the quality, the composition, the quality of the students changed dramatically. And what we have today is that 80% of the students at the City University are non-white, which is an almost exact reflection of the percentage of non-white young people in the city. So that is a democratic success, because the university itself reflects the society of New York City in providing this benefit, in a sense, this need, this service to young people so that they can begin their lives and contribute fully to the society. But at that time, this was a revolutionary thing. And Hostos Community College was founded specifically to address not just the change in the composition of the student body of the City University, but the vast numbers of new students. That the number of students in the City University more than doubled overnight. Overnight, there were more than twice as many, overnight, over twice as many students eligible to go to college and wanting to go to college. So Hostos Community College was founded to provide some means of simply students entering into a college And I think a very fateful step, the first fateful step, I think, in the founding of this, in the history of Hostos Community College, was its location. There was a huge struggle about that between different community leaders. And the president of our college at the time, Candido de Leon, insisted that the college be here at 149th Street. And I think that was a remarkably prescient and correct position to take, that Hostos Community College would be in the community itself. Almost all the other colleges were really on the outskirts. Even City College was really on the outskirts of Harlem, in fact, on the hill, and so on. But that was true for all of the colleges. You think about Bronx Community College, Queens College, Community College. But we were built here in the South Bronx. And then, as a consequence of that, the college began to understand that it would have to reflect this particular community. And I think the great success of this college and why this college matters beyond us. Something has to that the college has to matter beyond just us. And this college, to the degree it does something for us, we earn a living here, we get a degree here, whatever. But does this college matter beyond just us? And I think as it started out, the college mattered a great deal. I think it had national importance. I don't think we knew a way of announcing that, of drawing that attention to ourselves. But I think, in fact, we were a type of demonstration project of education for immigrants, education for students not only whose parents didn't go to college, but also hadn't completed high school within the community itself. But then something else occurred, and I do think that Candido de Leon was influenced by Hostos. I believe this. First of all, the college had no name. The name was Community College Number 8. And perhaps not the immediate idea to call the college after Hostos may not have been his idea. But he knew of Hostos, and I think it influenced his thinking. Because in the original organization of the degree requirements for the college was heavily liberalized. We probably had the most heavily liberal arts concentration for a degree of any community college that I know of. There was a requirement for a language, 6 credits. There was a requirement for social sciences, 12 credits. There was a requirement for Black history and for Latin American history and studies, 6 credits for humanities. There was mathematics, there was literature, heavily liberal arts. And then something else occurred, was the understanding that in this community, over half the people, their first language was not English, it was Spanish at that time, far more than half. And in order for access to open admissions to actually be able to occur, there had to be an educational program which would allow them to enter the college and begin their education, which meant the courses would initially have to be taught in Spanish while the students were learning English. So Hostos Community College became really the first bilingual college that we know, at least in this area. So that we had classes in Spanish in every imaginable subject, in biology, in mathematics, in history, the whole array of courses, and the students that had, and then there was something else that occurred. We had so many students that knew Spanish, but grew up here. So they spoke Spanish at home, they knew some Spanish, they visited relatives, and whatever, but they didn't know Spanish in a formal way. We had courses at the college for those students, New York-raised Latinos. We had specific courses which remedied that problem so that they learned Spanish grammar and could become bilingual, truly bilingual adults with much greater ranges of possibilities professionally. And so we became a bilingual college. And from the very, very beginning, there was an enormously political culture in college, and this goes back to Hostos, is that there was education to do something, education to react to the society, to change the society, to interact with the community, to reach out to the community, to become knowledgeable about the nature of the society and the possibilities of how to change it. And it was an enormously political atmosphere. All the time there were meetings and seminars and celebrations and participations in political life and so on. And then all of this became threatened. We lived under miserable conditions. We existed under miserable conditions. But it was a very lively school, and we functioned. And we fought and we won something. We won the 500 building. That was an extraordinary victory, this security mutual building. But it just sat there. Like we had this victory, it was almost a mockery. It was like a mockery of us that we had won this, and yet it just sat there. And we were stuck where we were in this sardine can, in a sense, for us. But while we were working this out and being very satisfied with some of this about this great victory, what became clear is that the intention was to close us. And in June of 1976, the Board of Higher Education officially closed this college. There was a resolution of the board to merge the college with Bronx Community, and that passed the board. And an amazing movement at the college struggled to reverse that, and it was successfully reversed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about this right now. And then, after this was over, what became even clearer, with this great victory, again, nothing changed. The building hadn't been fixed, we were still stuck over there. And what I think some of us, I was head of the union at the time, but with student leaders and others, and faculty and so on, what became clear is that this miserable building that we were all stuck in had a 10-year lease, and the clock was ticking. And that was really going to be the history of the failed Hostos Community College, 149 students, 10-year lifespan ending in collapse. That was for sure. And so there was a third remarkable struggle where we got the funds to renovate the building, and then a president arrived, money arrived, buildings were built, and we're here. Now that 5-year struggle went on from 73 until 78, and it secured this college. But there was such a rocky road after that. There's so many good things, but life here has never been easy. Anybody that wants an easy life, you don't belong here. This is not for anybody that wants an easy life. This is not the ivory tower, let me know that. But anyway, this is always difficult, and I suspect may always be. But why this difficult? It doesn't have to be this difficult. We'll try to smooth it out a bit. You're here to get help. But I think the point is, why do people struggle so hard? If the college closed, we could go. We could send the students to Bronx Community. They could go elsewhere. We were offered that. What was the need that people spent 5 years? We're not talking about going to a meeting on a Friday morning where they're serving coffee here. We're talking about 5 years that people dedicated themselves to ensuring that this college would not die. It was not the building. It really wasn't even the name, although the name was very important. It was that we were building something that was significant to this community specifically, and that we were providing an education which met the needs of this community. And I think as we saw that, and I don't think we articulated it so clearly or so well. I think that was maybe part of the problem. We had trouble. I think as we went on, was that part of the problem was, I think that we didn't articulate this. And I think what we had was an underlying philosophy. And the underlying philosophy, I think, is that it is valid for immigrants. It is valid for African Americans, for West Indians, and Africans, while they are being empowered to become citizens of this country, to also maintain their own cultures. They have a right to their languages, have a right to their cultures, and that the solution is not assimilation. And I think this is a powerful philosophy, and I think we were too timid in expressing it. And over time, I think it became diluted. We did not have this kind of meetings about Hostos to learn about him. So very often, it's very difficult. We're struggling day to day with what we have to do. So it becomes harder very often to get a vision and to continue our vision forward. And I think we lost some of that along the way. And then the reaction very often, when the college found itself in trouble at different points, was to become practical. Well, very often to be practical means to give up your principles. You know, the important thing is when things get tough, is don't give up your principles. That's not the time to do it. You need your principles to get through the difficult times. That's really what's going to get you from one point to another point. And so this is a great opportunity for us. The whole festival around the 175th anniversary of Hostos' birth, and also now the 45th anniversary of the college's existence, for us to reflect on our own history of the college and how, by adopting the name of Hostos for our college, that to respect that and to honor that and to be authentic about this, and that it's not some empty ritual, but it has actual substance, is that we have to learn that and then look, are we doing this? Are we really having a pedagogy here that activates students for their own regard? In other words, in terms of the DREAM Act, in terms of quality education, in terms of the rights of bilingual education, to the need to integrate into our curriculum the history of African American people. Everyone has to know the history of African American people. If you're an immigrant to this country, you have to learn that first. You have to learn what was the history of the African American people in this country. Where is that in our curriculum? Where are those courses? Why aren't they required? What is required? What do you need to have a degree? Says who? Says who? Who made this up? I thought we had something to say. If we don't have something to say, what is this all about? You know? So I think we really need to take advantage of this and to have hope that, in fact, through knowledge and through our own inner strength, that we can bring to life at Hostos Community College the great principles, the great history, the great memory, and the great strength of someone like Emeritus de Hostos, so that we can become what he hoped students and teachers would become, is agents of change, to make this a much more democratic society and to make this possible for as many people as possible. Thank you very, very much.
Questions. We have a question right in the back. And please speak up since we don't have any microphones to bring to you.
I'm literally for business. Question for Professor Meyer. Going back to the history of Hostos, does your research show any collaboration with another Revolution scholar, Archivist, which is our institution in Harlem? Was there any kind of collaboration between Hostos and Schomburg?
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. We're missing Orlando a lot. He's really a profoundly knowledgeable scholar on Hostos, but I'm so glad you mentioned Schomburg, because again, there should be a collaboration immediately with Hostos and the Schomburg Library, for example. In other words, what are we directing the students toward? You know, here we have this remarkable asset, which is, you know, on that bus right there. We can get there in 15 minutes. And there's exhibitions, there's everything there, there are research materials there. And to see the, as Yolanda pointed out, to take the students out of the school, it's critical that our students get out of this school. I send my students to the Metropolitan Museum, and you know, a talking teacher, the teacher does, you know, but in my class, my 2 students that have been to the Metropolitan Museum, it's 3 subway stops away. That was paid for by the taxpayers of the city of New York. You know, that these are assets that we need to get a broader life and to get a broader vision. And not to be so afraid, not to be so frightened. Things are going to be okay if we really get our skills and we get our knowledge and we get experience with activity, with doing something. We're going to survive, and we'll probably do much better than survive. Thank you.
Professor Chapman? Can you speak up, please?
I can't hear you.
I love the statement that morality has to be based on science. Science first.
The what?
I love the statement, the Hostos comment.
Morality has to be based on science.
Yes. Yes, I caught that too. Yes, I love that.
Okay, so I would love to have more information
Yes.
on that. I would also like to touch on specifically, and I believe firmly in this, I remember in high school being redirected, thinking of the melting hot model versus the salad bowl.
Yes.
Thinking, where you're thinking that we should retain a certain amount of our own culture and honor it and respect it and revel in it. But we use, you said that we should not be using the word assimilation, so I'm looking for a word to substitute for that.
I think it's cultural pluralism.
What?
Cultural pluralism. It's a word, it's a phrase that's been lost. It's been lost. It's a victim of the McCarthy era that's been lost. Like so much else that was so good in our society. And it was a philosophy which was carried out into a very large extent in educational situations where there's really a set of parallel goals. And the one is to empower students immigrants from immigrant backgrounds and also from working class backgrounds, to empower them to participate in society more actively. But understanding that that doesn't in any way necessarily entail erasing the original culture, and in fact would be very likely have the opposite effect. That this, I don't know how much more we want to go with this idea, but I think that we're lacking very often vocabulary. Without the words, we can't even perhaps think of the idea, but we certainly can't express the idea. So we're left in a position of being weak and not being able to defend ourselves and from interventions which are not in our interest or the interest of our students or our communities. And so we're lacking vocabulary. And I think that we can restore that through efforts like we're doing today. I mean, I had to study something to give my talk. You know, this is good for me, you know. I think one thing that interests me a lot, because I'm a historian, is where does Hostos fit in, you know, to the thinkers of his time? You know, where are they? You know, and this amazingly powerful focus on education, for example. But there are people that they want a republic, but they want a democratic republic. They're against monarchy, for sure. They're against slavery. They're for gender equality. And they see the method, one critical method toward that is by a very general, broad, empowering education as a method of creating a citizenry that could defend themselves and rise up. I think probably they are all influenced by the Jacobins in the French Revolution. That's my guess. It's Jacobinism, kind of radical republicanism that wants to activate people, en masse to defend a progressive modern world,
Thank you. We have Chris, Father Sheehan, and then we go to the back, Hector, and I'm sorry I don't know your name. I also want to recognize the honors program is in the house, so please, I hope we get your participation before this morning ends up.
My question, I guess, could be addressed to either Professor Casari or Professor Meyer. I was really struck in your presentation about the investment that was happening in the Bronx during the early 60s, and was just wondering about what impact, if any, the Great Society programs of the late 60s had or did not have on the Bronx, so particularly the South Bronx.
I'll let Professor Meyer think about that for a second. I'm not sure myself, maybe in terms of investment or in education. I was putting together a timeline for this presentation, but I abandoned it. So many things happened. I was doing a timeline for 1968, just 1968, when, as we know, a lot of things happened, terrible things. But I wondered about that myself because as I scrolled through the timeline, President Johnson's what was it called? Great Society was there. So I'm not sure myself.
Chris, but Lyndon B. Johnson is on my mind a lot. Maybe you too, because it was during his administration as president that we had the greatest degree of economic equality in the history of the United States. And I think you would ask anyone, they would say it was under Roosevelt, my great hero. But the fact is, the greatest degree of economic equality was under Lyndon B. Johnson. And he was a remarkably aggressive figure. I remember before Johnson, you would see people in the early morning with their shopping carts outside of the housing project to get surplus food. There was no food stamp. And people would get pounds of cheese and flour and so on, It was just the most depressing thing. They would be waiting in the snow, oh God, it was awful. There was no Medicare. There was no Medicaid. We forget this. Social Security didn't extend to domestic workers or farm workers. All this was done under Johnson. There was no Pell Grants. There was the only help to loans to get into a college was a loan where you had to sign that you were not a communist to get the loan. We forget these things. I refuse to sign. I was very brave when I was young. Now I'm sort of getting a little shaky. But anyway. but I mean, he was such a great man. And I think he had come from a very poor background. He was a white guy from Texas, a segregated state that fought for black people. And then what did he do? Go to Vietnam and drag us into that. And the reputation of this country and bomb those people to the smithereens. There were more tonnage of bombs dropped on Vietnam during the Vietnamese War than all the bombs dropped in Western Europe during World War II. What a terrible crime against humanity. Horrible crime against humanity. And yet, domestically, there was more efforts done. And I think what he did was set up this whole possibility of more general, access to higher education through the loan systems and so on. This was now beginning to roll, and the empowerment, really, of minorities especially, coming out of this. And he was very good. When he signed the Voting Rights Act, he said, we, meaning the Democratic Party, we lost them, meaning the whites, for a generation. Well, we've lost them for 2.5 generations, but he still did it. He still did it. I think that somewhere after we're dead, at least me, that there'll be some way of writing this so we can see Johnson for his caring, really, of being the extension of the New Deal, of taking, which he profoundly believed in with Roosevelt and with Henry Wallace, that the extension of the New Deal into further areas, into education. And I too think that what they got was, again, not articulated so much, but philosophized or ideologicalized, is that education is a right, a democratic right, but it does not exist in the Constitution. Our Constitution was written before the notion of having social and cultural rights to be included. The best that we have is the 14th Amendment. Thank God we have that, which came after the Civil War, which says there have to be equality of rights. But there's nothing in the Constitution that guarantees any social right to education, to medicine, to housing, to food, for nothing at all. Roosevelt said that's what's wrong, that we need a second Bill of Rights to guarantee housing and jobs and medicine. He said that in 1944. But that didn't happen. So what's happening with Johnson is he's now moving the New Deal forward into areas of medicine, medical care. I remember my grandmother, she was sick, said, Grandma, why don't you go to the doctor? It costs $5. I remember that. You know, I mean, it was terrible. I mean, there was no access to anything. And how this has now changed, we take this for granted. Now, everything that Roosevelt fought for, and that Johnson fought for, and that won, is all under attack. Every piece of it is under attack. The food stamps, anything is under attack. So, we're thinking about Hostos, and thinking about the need for education. We're going to school to try to get a better job, to do this and that and the other thing. But there are people there working 24/7 to pull the rug out from under the whole thing. And if we don't pay attention to that, this is going to be very empty. Because there are fewer and fewer jobs. The jobs are just disappearing. There's less and less possibilities. And what does exist is under attack. So if we don't have an education that develops a consciousness among the educators and among the students, we're probably doomed. But I thank you for asking about it, but a lot was done. I think there's one thing I prefer the New Deal. I'm no guy. You know, the first time I saw an adult cry was when Roosevelt died. My grandmother wept. You know, I mean, adults did not cry for their children when I was where I came from, you know, and I can never forget that. But the idea was that somehow we have to be able to have an education that brings this out. But if we don't have history as requirement, how do students learn this? We don't want to have history as requirement. How do we let this happen? Then how do students learn about Roosevelt? How do they learn about Johnson? How do they learn about the New Deal? Well, apparently that's not necessary anymore. We're getting very practical. That's not practical at all. That's stupid. You know, somebody said that the philosophy of America is crackpot pragmatism. It's being practical in a way that's dumb. And that's dumb. And we have to know, we have to have knowledge, we have to have a context. We have to have a context within which we can analyze it. A phrase, I don't know who said this, but I love it. It says that knowledge is facts in context. And the context is provided by history. So if we don't know history, the facts that we have are not knowledge. They're just little bits and pieces of things that we necessarily will forget because they're not connected with anything. So we're talking about an educator with an educational philosophy that really is inspiring to us to know more. There are other people that have, I think, other educational philosophers. I'm very interested in my going to develop that. But there are others that we need to look at as well. But That's one of the most desperate needs, is that students that have to work can still go to college and get a talent. That's long overdue. We have a Democratic governor, we have a Democratic mayor, we have a union. Let's get that. You see what I'm saying? In other words, and I think when we win something, it energizes us. It energizes us. Someone said, in terms of the work in the 30s, that a defeated American working class would not fight fascism. They were right. You don't fight fascism if you're defeated. You fight back when you have victories, when you have confidence. And that's what we need to have by having an agenda. And one of the pieces that we're determined to do, you said as a major leader of this, I just do whatever she said, that we're fighting to get an elevator for the subway.
Professor Meyer,
Yes.
sorry to cut you off, but we have a number of questions that I'd like to get to, and I'm sure there's questions for the rest of the panelists. So Father Sheehan, Dr. Soto, and then you, sir.
How many video? Where does he fit in less than 10, less than a whole day?
And if we can keep the remaining answers brief, just to get everybody involved.
Yeah, sure, I heard.
To be careful.
You're all there, it's a lot, you know, it's sort of like
If I come in the video.
Oh, you're asking about
Yeah, I like politicians.
Herman Geo.
It's always associated with us.
He was instrumental in founding this college.
And then he
Became, and his relationship to the college was so possessive that he could not detach himself from it. And he ended up, when he joined the reactionary political spectrum, he ended doing a tremendous amount of damage to this very same college. And it also, I remember those days because we were trying to pull our hairs to see what could be done about it. And of course, one of the things that you do, I'm sure that people will talk more about it. He joined the conservative Giuliani administration. There are all kinds of theories about why he may have done that. Among them, that he was not backed by liberals when he was really running for mayor, and therefore he was trying to really get back at them. But that's in the past, and somebody else will do the analysis. I think he wanted to have some kind of a say, a prominent say in New York City politics, and that was probably the only thing that was open to him at that time. Now, having said that, he actually led himself to do precisely what Jerry's been talking about, really taking away some of the basic support elements that are necessary. It was also at that time, and I will say it out loud so that people will now know what some of us who were then here acquiring with. It was also at the time when the High Board of Education was taken over by the reactionary sectors in this state's politics, which actually ended up depriving even representation, not just the faculty, but a single educated-minded person or educated member. There wasn't for the longest while, I'm not sure there is one now, an educator on the board of trustees. And that is a real paradox, isn't it? This is an education, CUNY is an educational institution. So it was really taken over, lock, stock, and barrel, and this is by people who were interested in following a certain economic pattern, right? And depriving a public institution of its, traditional elements that. Now, Badillo, I think at that time, was very harmful because he wanted to get rid of our president, but beyond that, he was actually taking propaganda, half-truth, to the press, and it was being published by respectable newspapers like the Daily News, just as he gave it to them. And that was a real anathema, because this is supposed to be a certain amount of objectivity, or so they claim, right? I know that because we were actually talking to people about how could they be publishing this when it's only half-truth. They did not give the other side the opportunity to present the case. I don't know if you can add to that. And you know, we don't take away anything important that he did. He was the first president of an extraordinary character in the late 60s. He was the first president of Bronx Borough. I think he represented change. He was, I think, looking for, perhaps as a result of precisely, you know, the poverty programs and inclusion. But isn't it tragic that he ended up doing what he did?
In the House, he was the sponsor of legislation that empowered, enacted bilingual education. He was an important person.
Yes, bilingual education.
First Puerto Rican in Congress. He served the East Harlem and the South Bronx from the district of Maine. I think Benito Marcantonio came from that area. And it's a very progressive district. And he was a major progressive figure in the Congress. And frankly, he sold out. I mean, that's all you can say. I think part of it was, you know, hubris, that he reached too far. Why wasn't he satisfied to be a congressman, to support the people? You know, that wasn't enough for him. So he tried to be mayor and failed. And then after he failed, he didn't want to go back. So he kept fishing around for some way to gain power. And in the process, he went further and further to the right and betrayed his own district, his own contribution. And we don't think about it. He did very many progressive things. He helped us a great deal, by the way, in getting the bill over. He really did help us. I mean, nonetheless, he then turned on us and actually jeopardized, I think, the existence of the college. I mean, it wasn't just the college was going to be closed once. I think there were two other times when the college could be closed. And I want to, we don't have to sort of go into that right now, but there were two other times when there was a time when our enrollment collapsed. When the Republicans were elected, they no longer let anybody that could receive public assistance go to college, basically. So overnight, we lost 40% of our enrollment. Overnight. I mean, and we almost closed. I mean, and then on another point, and this was the deal, they accused us of allowing students to graduate and not pass the exam. I believe maybe we did.
Professor Soto? Before I get to what I was going to ask or take an observation on, Herman Badillo, I don't think turned as much as did a full circle. Because before he started doing the good things, and he did some good things here in the South Bronx. And I forget which year, but he was the head of urban renewal. And he was responsible for the displacement of the Puerto Rican community on the west side in particular, but all over the city, which ended up creating the South Bronx in many ways. So he just went full circle, went back to where he came from. And I'm glad he's off to that. But following up on your statement about fact, what is knowledge, fact, and context, I would just like to reiterate that struggle around Hostos, and it's everything that you said, Professor Meyer, and Professor Hernandez, all of that, but it was not a Latino struggle. This was a struggle of the Puerto Rican community in the South Bronx. We were the South Bronx, not now, but we were then, and that struggle was also, the Hostos struggle was part of the struggle of the Puerto Rican community coming to consciousness and coming to age politically. I think we recognized, we didn't know who Hostos was. We didn't know who Betances was. We didn't know what Pedro Albizu Campos. We didn't know who Munoz Marin was. Those of us that were born here. And so it was in the process of us learning and us acquiring the pride about being who we are and saying we have something valuable to say. The struggle about Hostos was the same as the march itself about going over the bridge. The same thing. This was the bridge. And so this was about identity, power, coming of age, and it was Puerto Rican, not a Latino thing. It opened the door in many ways to the Latino thing, but it was a Puerto Rican struggle. Puerto Ricanos were the ones who were fighting on the inside, alongside of the inside, but I think that has to be made very clear. My last observation, or my last comment, how do we make the change? How do we make the changes going forward? Because not everybody, in fact, only to this day, only a small sliver
of the community is going to be coming to our classrooms, to all of the classrooms of CUNY, all of the schools in the United States. So how do we get to the community? The leaders are going to be coming not necessarily from these classrooms. They're going to be coming from the people in the streets, the people who are still working as truck drivers, bus drivers, sanitation. And so how do we get leadership to them? How do we give them the leadership? How do we give them the knowledge and the resources that we have to give them the knowledge and the skills that they're going to need to create change, even as we do that here? Question.
One of you want to respond? Quick.
I think one of the great successes of the latter part of the history of the college is that we now have an adult education wing with 10,000 students. These are community residents, they're developing skills, they're getting their GEDs, they're learning English, they're getting job-related skills, which will help them, pay their rent and to survive and manage with their families. So we have something, and I think that Peter Merton has just been a hero of this. He's been I'm allowed to, he's a quiet guy, and we have to really recognize him for his college. He's done a wonderful job. But I think that there's possibly, someone could teach a course in adult education for the community on the types of things we're talking about. I know the political party, I pay a lot of attention to its history. When it was strong in the United States, in their schools, they always taught speech. They taught Robert's Rules of Order, so that when you were a worker, you could go into a union meeting and function in the meeting successfully. You were given all, you were taught Spanish, so you could interact with other people. You were taught the language of your parents very often, in order to connect you with your family and your community in a full way. I mean, I think that not everything has to occur for someone receiving a degree. I think this is what you're saying, but I think that I think Peter Merton is a very progressive person, and if we had proposals for him, that would be very helpful. Also, I think we have to find common struggles. What we struggle with, the same way the community recognized that it was in their interest to have Hostos Community College survive, we have to now help the community. For example, which is our struggle too, is to fix the 149th Street subway station. I mean, if we can't fix 149th Street subway station, we're not going to change the world. You know what I mean? This is perfectly doable. This is the first subway station in the borough of Bronx. It's a hub, it's a major transportation hub. We have Lincoln Hospital, we have the intake system for the homeless people, we have also the Michelangelo, the major hub for the Bronx and for the city of New York. And we're in a disgraceful situation. There are 89 steps, which I walk, and I take each one got a little hard, I want you to know. I mean, I look pretty good, but you can't tell a book by its cover, you know what I mean? I'm not as good as I look, believe me. And every step, oh my God. But I think that we need to join the community. It's in our interest, it's our students, it's us, and for the community, and then to look out further. That we had a meeting, the union meeting yesterday, and we invited community leaders to the meeting. And they have very important issues that we can relate to and respond to. That this should not be a dumping ground for everything that happens in the city of New York. Where garbage trucks from Manhattan Park, and where sanitation is incinerated, and any time there's any social need that winds up here, that's not fair, and it doesn't make for a successful community. And our job, I think, as a community college, is to provide leadership to the community, and direction and guidance to the community, and resources. And I think that can be done through the library, it can be done through adult education, it can be done in the curricula of our courses, to empower students to reach out within their community, and so on.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, and the gentleman passed on his question, but I want to make sure that the students in the room have an opportunity to ask a question if they so desire before we do wrap up. that a general question? He chose to pass, and that's why I opened it to the floor. Now students want to? Okay. Oh, yes, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Gerald. I'm an honors student, and I don't need to give my back to everyone. My question was, what fluence Hostos to advocate for women in education, and particularly in science?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear it.
Yes, what influence Hostos to advocate for women in education, and particularly in science?
Well, you know, I think I want to grab on something that Jerry said before, because we have been terribly influenced into thinking that things happen in an isolated fashion. And what, you know, I've been doing work on Hostos out of necessity, really. We had a symposium, a number of activities 10 years ago, with, you know, 100th centennial of his death, right? And so there were nobody else really could pick it up. So I felt that, you know, we had to do it. So I became very interested and committed to do research on Hostos, and I have continued to do so, right? And very, very rewarding exploration. And I found out that there's a lot of myths about Hostos. He became a legendary figure. And of course, what you find out is that he was an extraordinary character, right? You know, at times very frustrated. He had a terrible time when he was in New York. My book will, you know, explore that further. And he's been attributed as having done things that I think only Superman could have done. Because the historians and people who did research have not, and now I think it's been changing in the last few years, right? Looked into context. And the context, the historical context, will tell you that there were things happening, both in Europe and in this country and in Latin America, about women. And that women were actually starting to, for several decades, they had already started to demand their rights, to put forth, proposals for change. At the time that Hostos was in New York in 1869, 1870, for the first time, he was actually writing for a staff writer for La Revolución de Cuba y Puerto Rico, which was the newspaper of the Cuban Revolutionary Patriotic Junta, right? There was a war going on in Cuba, the 10-year war, which was 1868, 1878, and Hostos was very much in support of the independence struggle, and came here actually thinking that he could get into an expedition to go to Puerto Rico to pick up arms against the Spanish. The level of exploitation was such that people were so offended and very taken to fight with anything that they could against exploitation, in this case colonialism. When Hostos was here, there were two women, two important, later on they became suffragists, but they were doing all kinds of other things. Anthony, Susan B. Anthony, and what's the name of Elizabeth Cady, who were writing and publishing a newspaper called The Revolution, right here in New York. Hostos doesn't mention these ladies by their name or the newspaper, but New York was a small place. New York was only Manhattan. There were about 900,000 people living in New York at that time. And there were, intellectuals, probably and the activists probably knew everything that was happening. Hostos came from Spain during a time when they had been exposed to a very significant philosopher, German philosopher, by the name of Wilhelm Krauss. And this is now a footnote in terms of German philosophy, because you know that there are all kinds of titans in German philosophy. But this guy was very progressive. He believed in education, and he believed that women should be given the opportunity to educate themselves, that that was going to bring up society as a whole. So Hostos heard that when he was going at the university where he was going in Madrid, and in lectures where this was being discussed. So when he actually travels to places like Chile or the Dominican Republic, and there are issues that have to do with women, he did not become he was a major influence. He was a participant, and he actually played a significant role, but it wasn't that he had brought about the ideas or but that he actually brought education to women to any places. Those things are happening. What he did was, was an extraordinary feat, because in his analysis, and hopefully we'll have this at some point to read, he does a sociological analysis, if you could call it that at that time. So he asks, well, who's responsible for this happening? He says, well, men are responsible for this happening. And why is it happening that men are depriving women and denying? He uses the word denying, right? Which is a very strong word. So he does an analysis which is very much on target, in solidarity with women, and tries to convince men, which is really his audience, this is not going to help you. This is not going to help the country. This is not going to help the nation. You have to think in alternative ways, and besides, it is their right. So he's combining all these arguments in a very beautiful speech. Tough to read because 19th century prose. But that brought about, say that his education about women's rights really comes from his previous experiences and the fact that he was also exposed to very smart women.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank everybody.